Welcome to Civil War Digital Digest. I'm Will. Well, the Waterloo Historic Farm Museum has allowed us to come back and shoot more episodes here, and today we're going to talk about somebody who lived not too far from here in the Saline area, and her name's Lucretia Gillett. Bill Christen, a historian and author, has done a bunch of research on Lucretia, and he started talking about her online, and it piqued my interest. Who's Lucretia?
Lucretia Gillett was a photographer in Saline, Michigan from about 1860 to 1890. She was born in Leroy, New York, and her brother George and his wife Eliza were photographers in Leroy. So their father moved in the 1850s to Saline. He was a lawyer and a very prominent member of the Methodist Church. Once Lucretia learned about photography, she started on her own in Saline, and her brother went up to Ann Arbor to take photographs. Her brother and his wife were divorced or separated, so she stayed back in Leroy, and Lucretia did the photography for till 1890 in Saline.
Great, and this is really what interested me. When we did an episode earlier with Dave Rambo at H.H. Bennett Photographic Studio in Wisconsin, we ran into Bennett going off and taking art photographs and his wife Frankie minding the store. Here we have another woman in the 19th century working this as a profession. Can you talk to me a little bit about that?
Right, and it was unusual, indeed, but she's part of what I'm finding out is a larger number of women who were in the profession. I find many backmarks on CDVs or small photographs with Mr. and Mrs. as photographers. But she stayed into the business. She had a boarder, Laura Green, who she actually taught photography to. Laura went on to Manchester, Michigan, and became the photographer there along with two other women photographers. And Miss Gillett was one of three photographers in Saline. Her brother left, but there was another woman who was also a photographer for a while.
And you just said Miss Gillett.
Yeah, she never married. She maybe was too busy, I guess. I don't know. I don't know of any suitors, except we did find a piece of sheet music later dedicated to her by a composer, and hopefully someday we'll hear what that music was about. He was a popular songwriter of the period, Mr. Grinnis.
Fantastic.
So.
Well, talk to me about her art. Obviously, as we look at some of these photographs, we also see the backmark. There's a stamp on there. What is that stamp, for those who don't know?
A backmark is an advertisement for the photographer. And it started out in 1860-61 when CDVs or small images became available. So it started out as just the name of photographer. And then eventually it became decorative with artwork, a little more information, where they were from. Also to have a little thing saying negatives preserved, and that would write down the negative number. And to us as historians, the bonus would be if they wrote down the person who they photographed and when it was taken. And you can date CDVs from 1860 to 1872 by the characteristics of the backmark and the card. After 1872, there's a whole other set of dating things. So we're fortunate that we can easily spot a Miss Gillett backmark. Her name would be on there, and her brother had an interesting backmark with a beehive. So when you see a Gillette in the beehive, you know that it came from George in Ann Arbor.
Oh, fantastic. And the beehive, of course, in some circles meaning industry, so that's a very interesting backmark. Right. There's one more thing on the back of some of these CDVs that help us date it, and that is a stamp that's been affixed. Will you talk to me about that?
That would be a tax stamp. Near the end of the Civil War, the last 2 years, the federal government needed a way to help pay for the war. So tax stamps were placed on photographs, playing cards, documents, and other paper goods. So the photographer would have to pay a tax and pass it on to the purchaser. And he put a postage, it looked like a postage stamp, but it would say tax stamp, 1, 2, or 3 cents, depending on the value of the image. And he'd cancel it with either his name or a stamp or just an X. And that occurred from August 1864 to August 1866. So that narrows the time frame. If we see a stamp or the remnants of a stamp on a CDV, we know approximately when it was taken.
Well, talk to me about in Saline where Miss Gillett worked.
Her studio was in her home, which was a block off of the main street, today US 12, that goes through Saline, and the Ann Arbor Saline Road. And it was a block up in a two-story house according to the map of the town and the Sanborn Fire map. Described, it actually says photo studio. Unfortunately, that house was, after she left Saline in 1890, that house was torn down. There's a beautiful Art Deco house in its place, but the barn in the backyard is still there, where her barn from that period is still there. We don't know if did she store chemicals there or do anything there, but the current owner says it was her barn and it was there.
Fantastic. Well, in our Civil War era series here, talk to me about any Civil War photography she did.
She certainly took pictures of many of the civilians in town, and we do know that she took at least one photo of a Civil War soldier, and I'm searching for more. So we hope that those will turn up.
Okay, well, great. If this is something you're seeing, feel free to reach out to us at the Digest. We're in regular contact with Bill. It'd be great to build a larger community and maybe connect some more of Lucretia's dots.
Right.
Let's carry her through past the Civil War and talk about later in her life.
Her brother and two of her sisters eventually, by 1890, moved to California, near San Diego. And he went on to be a farmer and a businessman out there. And one of the sisters became a seashell collector. And she married a man who was a seashell collector.
And that's a thing?
Yeah, well, it was out there. They had the largest collection of the particular kind of ocean seashells that they had, and it's actually part of a university collection in San Diego today. And that sister lived into the 1920s. Unfortunately, Lucretia died in 1894. Where she's buried, we do not know. There's a newspaper account that says like an obituary that said she died. But we don't know where Lucretia's buried. I've searched and nobody seems to be able to find.
Had she moved with the family to California?
The whole family moved to California. And in fact, if you read the Saline newspapers from the 1890s, you'll find every month there's probably an update of what the family was. And the sister who was a seashell collector, her daughter came back to go to school in Michigan and often visited Saline. So there's an update on where the family was and what's going on.
Fantastic. Well, Bill, thank you for bringing Lucretia's story and for starting to have a larger conversation about gender roles and some careers that women were pursuing in the mid-19th century during the Civil War era.
Right.
So
I'm happy to do that. And another place to look for women's careers are parasol makers. I found in city directories a number of women who were in the parasol making business.
Great.
Another place to look.
Great. Well, as we look for the larger world of the Civil War, we look for what all Americans are doing and how the war and how the era affects all of us. And here's another little way to do it, and another way to look again at photography as we've done with other people. Thank you for spending your time with us. We'll see you in a few weeks.